Welcome to the Virginia Cooperative Extension Plant Clinic, all about veggies. These plant clinics were sponsored by the Virginia Cooperative Extension program of Virginia's two land-grant universities. So this is co-sponsored by Virginia Tech and Virginia State University. The plant clinics are staffed by Master Gardeners from Fairfax County Master Gardeners Association, and we share science-based horticulture and gardening information with you. Heather, who's here to talk about canning.
Rebecca said, I'm going to be talking about canning tonight. There are two methods for preserving the products from your garden or the farmer's market, wherever you get your produce. There's boiling water canning, which is what I do mostly. And then there is pressure cooker canning. And you use that for higher acid foods that need a higher pressure for a longer time, higher heat to kill any microorganisms that might be in there to avoid botulism and any other foodborne illnesses. For boiling water canning, you can use supplies that are found in most kitchens. You just need a deep pot with a lid and a rack for jars to sit on. I just have kind of very hardy plastic rack that I put in the bottom of my pot, because you don't want the canning jars to come in direct contact with the pot because they can crack. I do boiling water canning usually and pickling together. Adding vinegar to foods to pickle them also is kind of a safer way to do canning. The vinegar creates that acid, so you don't have to worry as much about foodborne illnesses. These are some bread and butter pickles that I made last summer. And then also we pickled these green beans, which if you've never had pickled green beans, they're delicious and a fun, easy way to use some of your beans if you have too many, like I always do. For canning jars, the easiest thing to use are those bell jars that you can find everywhere. They have this threaded necks that makes it easy for the screwing bands to go on. And they come in a variety of sizes and widths. Just keep in mind that you do need to have jars that will be completely submerged in your pot. So if you have a really big canner, you can use bigger jars. Smaller ones, obviously smaller jars, so they're completely submerged in the water when you boil them. Screw lids, I always have more jars than I do lids, but they're these two-piece canning jars with a flat lid and then a screw band that goes on the top. And then the screw lids are threaded over the jar, really not used to seal the jar because that happens in the water. It's just to hold the lids on during the heating process. And when you're doing the boiling water canning, the tops of the jars, the metal tops, will kind of suck down and make a popping sound. So that's how you know that they're sealed. So the screw lid is just kind of to keep everything together during the boiling process. Canning recipes are all over the place. Online cookbooks, Pinterest is a really great place to find recipes because, especially with pickling, you can use different amounts of vinegar and sugars and all kinds of different spices to create the pickles. And the best way to do this is to just kind of look around online. The other reason you need to have an actual recipe is because different combinations of vinegar and sugar and different vegetables have to boil for specific amounts of time. And that's something that you want to use like a tried recipe to make sure that the jars are boiled long enough to create that seal and be sterile. When you want to get started, sterilize the jars and lids in the hot water, but don't heat the screw bands. They don't hold up so well. You can dunk those in hot water for 4 or 5 minutes. You can also, I sometimes use my dishwasher on the sterilized setting if I'm feeling lazy and don't want to stand over the hot water for too long. And like I said, the recipes will tell you specify how long the jars need to be boiled and also how much space to leave at the top of the jar, because you don't want to have them full to the brim because that can crack the glass. So different vegetables require different amounts of space at the top of the jar. Pressure canning, I have to admit that this is not something I do because I'm terrified of pressure cookers. But you use these for non-acid vegetables, meat, poultry, or fish. Also, if you want to do tomatoes, most sites that you look at that you need to use a pressure canning method, or you can do. I've made salsa the boiling water method before, but you have to add so much vinegar to it that it wasn't very good. So I usually just make salsa and freeze the jars. And so, but the pressure cooker is needed for these kinds of products because you need greater heat to kill harmful bacteria spores, because you definitely want to avoid any risk of botulism. And again, even more than with the boiling water canning, when you're using these pressure canners, it's really important to follow tested, up-to-date recipes to ensure that all the microorganisms are killed. And in the references, I've listed some sites that can give you really good information on specific foods that you want to can. The National Center for Home Food Preservation is a great site. Clemson University has like canning foods at home fact sheet that's really helpful. And then the most comprehensive is the National Institute of Food and Agriculture from the USDA. And their blog site is fantastic for really how-tos for home canning.
Well, thank you so much, Heather. That was a great overview and lots for us to think about. Now I'm curious about pressure canning. I've tried water bath canning with pickles and things like that, but never been brave enough to, like you, I'm a little scared of pressure cookers.
Yep. And I did do some research about Instant Pots because they are pressure cookers, but all of the sites say that you cannot use an Instant Pot for pressure canning because there's no way to monitor the temperature and the pressure exactly. And so they counsel against using the Instant Pot. It's the only kind of pressure cooker that I'm not afraid of, but they don't work for this.
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
Canning's not so scary. I do my tomatoes that way.
Do you?
Yeah, it's not scary at all. I just use a stovetop, big pressure canner, and it's pretty simple.
Yeah. Okay. I might get brave and try it this summer.
So our next presentation on preservation is from Susan, and she's going to talk about freezing. If pressure canners freak you out a little bit, here's a much less scary and explosive way to potentially preserve your fruit and vegetables. So Susan, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. I don't know about your garden, but mine has started to come in, and now I find I'm dealing with how to preserve some of those precious vegetables that I've grown. And for me, in terms of preservation, freezing has been the best option. Now, there are a number of good ways to preserve vegetables. So why did I pick freezing? Well, first, it's easy and it's quick. So I like that method. It really doesn't take a lot of time or space to get vegetables ready to freeze. And freezing also preserves the color and the nutrient quality of the veggies. Now, for me, I find it's the best way to save vegetables coming out of my garden, or at least the ones I can't eat and that I can't give away. Now, you might ask, which vegetables can I freeze? And I come back and say, well, maybe it's better to start with the ones that don't freeze well, because that's going to be a much shorter list. Things like cabbage, celery, cress, cucumbers, endives, lettuce, parsley, radishes, they just don't hold up well because they don't hold their texture, color, or their flavor when they're frozen. Now, I've actually frozen lettuce, but I used it in a smoothie. It wasn't very pretty when it came out of the freezer, but it was just bulk as I was using it. So I didn't worry about the texture or the flavor or the color. Most other vegetables really can be frozen and they hold up really well, and you can enjoy them long after your vegetable garden has been put to bed for the winter. Now, before you get too excited about the idea of freezing all of your surplus vegetables, think about the space you're going to have to store those veggies. If you only have a refrigerator freezer, you may not be able to freeze many of your vegetables. Also, you need to have a way that when you get them in the freezer, that they'll freeze quickly. And if you have a really stuffed freezer, they're not as efficient, so they won't freeze as fast. Now, if you don't have adequate space, you really might need to consider some of the other options, the canning, the drying, that might be better preservation options for you than freezing. Now, when you get started, you need to think about the containers you're going to use. You need to have good containers to preserve the freshness of the vegetables and to protect them from the freezer environment. The container needs to protect against moisture and against vapor and against potential odors. They need to be durable. They need to hold up against these freezing temperatures, and they need to be leak proof. It's not fun to find that something that you put in your freezer in a bag maybe wasn't the right bag and it leaked all over your freezer. I've done that. Not a fun thing to do. So make certain that they're durable and that they're designed for the freezer. And when you seal them, make sure that whatever you're using, you can get a really proper, tight seal. Otherwise, you risk the texture. You may have also risked an accident in your freezers, which you don't want. Now, you have to prep your vegetables to get them ready to freeze. You really want to start by using vegetables that are picked at the height of their peak flavor. The best time to pick them is in the morning. That's when they're at their best. They're the crispest from the night. The heat of the day hasn't kind of sucked some of the energy and flavor out of them. Wash all your vegetables thoroughly in cold water and make sure you get all that garden dirt. I actually use like a vegetable brush on mine to try to, the ones that I can brush to try to get them clean. Now it's time to trim them up, cut off the ends, and whatever you're going to freeze, cut them into pieces that are roughly the same size. Look for all of those bad spots because freezing does nothing to improve the taste of those spots, so you don't want to preserve them. The next step is to blanch your vegetables. Now, what is blanching? Blanching is the process of scalding them in boiling water or in steam for a short period of time. This actually stops or slows down the enzyme action that causes vegetables to lose their flavor, their color, and their texture over time. Blanching also makes certain that any dirt or bacteria that you didn't get off in the cleaning process comes off now so that you've got a clean vegetable. And you don't want to preserve bacteria. It also has the effect of brightening up the color, and it helps hold in those vitamins that are so important. An important thing about blanching is that the time you blanch varies according to the type of the vegetable and the size of the pieces. Now, there are really good charts that you can easily find online that'll give you the blanching time for your vegetables. And here's an example of one. This is from Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Program. And if, like I said, if you Google blanching charts, that's how I found this one, you'll find many similar charts. I chose this one simply because I thought the presentation made it easy to read. I like the chart style with the different colors. Now, most of them are going to give you both boiling and steaming times, as well as pointing out which vegetables don't actually require blanching. This particular one also gives you information on drying. What is an appropriate drying time? Now, while you can boil or steam to blanch, most vegetables are going to be better blanched using the boil method. To boil, you use a pot with a basket and a lid. You use 1 gallon of water per 1 pound of vegetables. You bring the water, just the water, not the vegetables. You bring the water to a boil. You have the vegetables in the basket and you drop that basket into the water and you cover. Now that water is going to stop boiling. So you bring the water back to a boil and you start the clock once that water is boiling. Keep the heat high. You don't want that boiling to slow down. You want to keep it vigorous during the blanching process. Now, if it takes more than about a minute for the water to start boiling after you put the veggies in, you might have too many vegetables. It's important not to overload the pot. So remember, 1 gallon of water to 1 pound of vegetables. Once you've blanched the veggies for the appropriate amount of time, you lift that basket with the vegetables out and you plunge it into a large container of cold water. Now, this water really needs to be cold, like 60 degrees or even colder. You need to cool those veggies for about the same amount of time that you blanch them. And while you're cooling them, you need to keep that water cool, because boiling vegetables or vegetables that have been boiled are going to heat the water up. So maybe use cold running water or change the water. One thing you could do is use an ice bath. And if you opt for that, that's going to keep the water cool, but you need to use about 1 pound of ice for each pound of vegetables. So depending on how many veggies you're doing, that could be a lot of ice. Now, once your vegetables have cooled down for the right amount of time, you bring that basket up and you completely drain them and give them a little bit of time to dry. Your last step before putting everything in the freezer is to pack up your vegetables. And there are 2 good ways to do it. You can either dry pack them or tray pack them. Dry pack means you're just packing them into your selected container. Now, when you do this, be sure to leave a little bit of space at the top so you can press the air out and get a really good seal. If you overpack, you may find out that you don't have enough room to get the air out and you don't get a proper and clean seal, and that will go against the flavor and staying power of your vegetables. To tray pack, which is something that I like to do, is you spread your veggies out on a shallow pan, like on a cookie sheet, and stick that in the freezer. Let those vegetables freeze there, and once frozen, you pull that out and then you can pack them into your container. Again, make sure you leave room to get the air out and then you get a good solid seal. I will say one reason I like this approach is that the vegetables don't freeze together. They're not clumped. It's easy to, get them nice and flat, and they stay almost like individual pieces. Finally, you're ready to put your bounty into the freezer. Now, here, be sure you don't overpack your freezer. However much you want to have all of your special vegetables in your freezer, you need to be able to close the freezer door to properly preserve all your goodies. You also need to be able to find your vegetables. Frozen vegetables will last from about 8 to 12 months at 0 degrees. So if you've got a lot in a chest drawer and they're at the bottom, you may miss out on being able to really enjoy those vegetables. But when you do pull them out of your freezer, don't thaw them. They should go directly from your freezer to the cooking pot and finally to the table so that you can enjoy your garden all winter long. Here's some resources that I used and some good resources that I hope you'll use to get more information about freezing all of your vegetables. Caitlin?
Thank you, Susan. That was awesome. Great information, Susan. Thank you so much. So I'm going to take us through the next preservation method that we're covering tonight, and that's drying. And so water bath canning might be a little intimidating and you might not have the freezer space. I know I am now jealous of watching Susan's presentation. I wish I had a chest freezer, but drying is something that, might work. Again, depending on your snacking habits and how you use, ingredients in your kitchen, this might be something that you explore. So there are a number of different ways that you can dry food: air, sun. Those are ancient and, completely free ways to do this. But with our modern innovations, we can dry food in the microwave, the oven, or a dehydrator. And Susan was talking about the list of things that you can freeze. It's easier to say, here's what you can't freeze. Drying is kind of the same way. It's, extremely versatile. All of us, if you're a hiker, you buy those, dehydrated fruit slices, you can do that at home. Popular choices that I've just in my research: tomatoes, snap peas, but herbs are the first one that comes to my mind personally. And then of course, dried fruit. This isn't all about veggies clinic, but I'm going to talk about fruit just a little bit. Bend the rules tonight. So there's little preparation needed, but you do want to be conscious of safety when you're drying vegetables. You're going to want low humidity, a source of low heat. So it's not, you're using the oven, and I'll get to this in a minute, you're not baking it at 400 degrees. It's a low constant heat with good air circulation, and it just takes time. Like other preservation methods, you want to make sure that your produce is clean. You can blanch vegetables if you want. And then fruit, to prevent molding, you dip that in an acid bath, and you can use vinegar, you can use lemon juice. There are a lot of, my references at the end have a number of different acids that you can use. And then you're going to slice it really thinly and let your food dry. First method I'll talk about is air drying. This is a photo that I think all of us think about when we think about air drying. So it's good for herbs, it's good for peppers, really cool wreaths of peppers, and you can do that at home and dry them that way. And you have decor, but also a functional decoration in your kitchen. And then mushrooms are also easy to air dry, which I had never thought of until I did this presentation. It's like, oh, okay. And of course, this is easy. It's energy efficient. You literally hang things up and then they dry. Then sun drying is the other kind of free, use nature to your advantage. This takes a couple of days. It requires constant exposure to bright sunlight and low humidity. We might have the sunlight here in Virginia, but we do not have low humidity in Virginia. So this is not a method that's really recommended in our region. It's more for arid climates like Arizona or California. So kind of a bummer here, but it's a cool thing if you ever live out west. The other kind of quick method is microwave drying. something that most of us have in our kitchen. It's really fast. You can't dry everything in the microwave. It's not going to work, but this is good for herbs and leafy vegetables that, can dry out pretty quickly. You just put them between paper towels, you microwave for a couple minutes, let them cool. And if they're crumbly, great, ready to go. And then you can add a little bit more time if they're not quite dry. So that means just a couple minutes. Then there's oven drying. This is, probably for things that you're going to want bigger batches, but this is not energy efficient. A dehydrator is kind of the gold standard, but it will take 2 to 3 times longer in the oven. And your settings might not allow for a low enough temperature. So you're going to get a situation where your vegetables cook instead of dry, which is not necessarily desirable. So this is really the gold standard. If you're growing a ton of produce and the best method is for drying it, that's how you want to preserve it, a dehydrator is going to be your friend. They're pretty inexpensive. You can get one for as little as $50, and they go upward from there and you can spend several hundred, but they're generally energy efficient. They're built for this purpose. They don't take up a whole lot of space in your kitchen. Again, if this is something that you think is going to be really useful for you, investing in a food dehydrator might be something that is right for you. It's also really versatile. You can put anything in it. You can make fruit leather. You can, just preserve sliced tomatoes, that sort of thing. So a dehydrator is kind of like I said, the gold standard for methods here. And then I just want to reference back to a presentation we did a couple weeks ago where we talked about growing dry beans. This is something where you can use air drying. You don't need to do any special practices or cleaning or anything like that. You literally grow beans, let them dry until the husks are brown on the plant. And then you take the beans out, put them in a jar, and you're done. That's kind of a fun, especially if you're gardening with kids, that could be a fun activity. So then the storage is really straightforward. Store them in a cool and dark place. You can use those mason jars even if you're not going to water bath can or pressure can. Mason jars are super useful. You can put your dried vegetables and fruit in there, a tight fitting lid so nothing can get in there, and it'll keep for a couple months, up to a year. And you just want to monitor, this is your first time doing it, keep an eye on it the first couple days you put it in the jar. If you see any signs of mold or anything like that, toss it out. It needed to dry a little bit longer. So just use common sense. And if it doesn't look right, doesn't smell right, don't eat it. Now, I know the National Center for Home Food Preservation has been referenced a couple times by speakers tonight. It's a pretty no-frills website, but it has a ton of really useful information. And then a lot of my presentation tonight will look familiar if you click on the University of Minnesota extension. They have a good high-level overview of the different preserving methods. And then I like this Eating Well article. I know that's not one of our EDU sites, but they had a good overview of how to dehydrate fruits and vegetables to have around for snacks and things like that.
Jackie would like to know if you can dry in paper bags.
I think you can, especially if you're air drying things. You want to keep dust off of them, but air circulation is probably the most important thing. So I would test it out. And a paper bag might work for the microwave method since, they say to cover it in paper towels. Might be the same. A dehydrator, you don't need a paper bag. Same thing with the oven. You'll just put the food on trays. But I think for air drying, it might be a method that you could explore to keep it, keep dust off of your herbs and things like that as they're drying.
And then we have another question from Caroline about cucumbers. Obviously we know they're not great for freezing. How are they for drying?
I think personally, because cucumbers, I think this is probably the same as for freezing. Since they have such a high water content, that's going to take a really long time to dehydrate. I say go for it. If you're curious about a dried cucumber, they might be fabulous, but it's just going to add a little bit of time because they have but you can dry things like strawberries that have a lot of water in them too. So, test it out, see if you like it. If you're like, wow, these are terrible, then, it was an experiment. You tried it once and you go from there.
One more question, kind of going back to the conversation about freezing, other than like Tupperware containers, can frozen stuff be stored in Ziplocs, or would it vacuum sealer be better?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. Probably I don't have a vacuum seal. I think those would be fabulous, but they would probably be like gold standard for freezing. But if you're going to use a Ziploc, and that's what I use, make sure you're using the freezer Ziploc and not the regular Ziploc. That makes a big difference. The freezer Ziplocs work great. And I don't like the ones with the zippers. To me, they don't seem to hold up as well in the freezer. Not that I do an awful lot, but when I've used the zippers, it's harder to get things out, like sauces. They don't like to come out of those zippers, but the Ziploc that locks and what opens up, that's a lot easier to use to get like sauces out. If you have a vacuum seal, wonderful for you. I'm jealous, but I just use Ziplocs, but I use the freezer rated Ziplocs.
Blanching tomatoes, can you freeze those whole?
Yeah, after you've blanched them, you can. You know, you're not going to be able to pull them out and slice them. But I just chunk mine. I've done them whole, and it's okay because I'm going to throw them in a, cook them in something. But I just find they just take up less space in the freezer if I chunk them or blend them up. Mostly for chili, yeah, chunk it. It's just easier to store. But yeah, you can, after you blanch them and get the skins off, you can freeze them whole.
And then I'm going to jump in. And Heather, I think this question might be best answered by you. Do you need a pollinator for green beans?
As far as I know, green beans have both male and female parts, so they're flowers, so they're self-pollinating.
I took one of my raised beds in my garden and turned it into a pollinator bed. Unscientifically, have seen much better results in my vegetables since I've done that. I don't know about green beans specifically, but just generally having places for those pollinators in your garden where they like to go and hang out and maybe visit your vegetables too, it has been a big improvement for me.
And Caroline says she has lots of flowers, but no action so far. So maybe they're coming. They're slow. Flowers are a good sign. All right. So Rebecca, without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about seed saving.
So this is something admittedly I am not very good at. I feel like I start off every year with the best intentions and I'm going to save seeds from my garden to save myself money and to preserve those veggies that I have really enjoyed. And then I get busy and I just eat the stuff and I forget about the seeds. I feel like other people can probably relate to that, but I'm going to be better this year. This presentation has made me much more conscious of the fact that I need to do that this year. So saving our seeds, some good tips for getting started. You want to choose seeds from those heirloom varieties, those open pollinated plants that are not hybrid. I'll talk more about that in the don'ts part. Wait until the fruit is really, really ripe. Like we all know what a ripe tomato looks like, but if you're saving seeds from things like cucumbers and peppers, you want them to really get past the point where you would actually eat them. So grab those cucumbers when they're starting to turn yellow and those green peppers when they're starting to turn red, so that you know that they're completely ripe and those seeds are ready to go. Be really selective about the fruits that you choose to save the seeds from. So think those most edible, that juiciest tomato, the best looking fruit on the vine, those are the ones that you're really going to want to save the seeds from. So they're going to end up producing the best fruit going forward. Also, those plants that are just really, really productive and prolific, those are going to be great candidates for also saving seed. All seeds before you save them need to be completely dried. There are two different types of seeds. The dry seeds, so think plants like beans and peas, where the seeds come out once you take them out of the fruit, they're already dry, versus veggies like our cucumbers and tomatoes, where the seeds are kind of encased in a gelatinous coating. Those dry seeds from the beans and other plants are really all you have to do is pull those seeds out, lay them on some paper towels until they are completely dry. For those plants with the wet seeds, you'll need to do a little bit more work to make those ready for the drying process. So scoop those seeds into a small container of water with a lid, and then every couple times a day as you think about it, go through and give it a good shake to kind of agitate those seeds a little bit, and do that for 3 or 4 days before you take the seeds out, strain them, rinse all the final coating off of them, and then you can lay them out to dry the way you have with the dried seeds. That coating will actually prohibit germination, so you want to make sure that they're completely cleaned off before saving them. Once you've got your seeds completely dry, you can package them in paper, little paper envelopes, or in glass containers. Be careful about storing in things like plastic bags because you don't want them to build up any moisture inside if they're not completely dry. So stick to paper or glass if you can. And then don't forget to label the plant it's from, label the date that you've saved the seeds so that you don't forget or end up keeping the seeds too long, and you know what it is when you go to plant the next year. So it's just a few don'ts when saving seeds. So don't choose hybrid varieties of plants. The seeds from that will have the characteristic of one of the plants, but not of the hybrid cross. Don't pack your seeds when they're wet. Make sure that they have plenty of time to dry out. You don't want them to get moldy or damaged or not viable anymore. And don't store seeds longer than about 1 to 5 years. How long you can save the seeds really depends on the type of vegetable, but there's lots of great resources online that'll give you charts and things about how long seeds can be saved. And then there's just some references on seed saving.
Thank you, Rebecca. That is awesome. And we're getting some feedback in the chat that it's fascinating.
Yeah, I didn't know that about the wet seeds either. I thought that was great. There's a question in the chat about how long to keep seeds that you get from nurseries. Seeds typically have an expiration date on the package, so I tend to go by that. This year I threw down some seeds that were past their prime, and no surprise, they didn't actually germinate. So look for the labeling on the package. It'll say when they're good until. Yeah, don't overbuy seeds. That's like, should be a lesson I've learned by now.
But that's such an unfun lesson.
I know. I have that. I'm like, I suffer from that same affliction too, because also not knowing how much space I actually have in my garden, because I don't know, I buy things every year and then I don't actually end up planting them because there physically isn't enough room for all of the things I want to plant.
And then a separate question, potatoes, when should you plant? Those are an early spring vegetable, so you can plant those well before, you know, the last frost date for Virginia. And then you can plant them again in the fall. And you're actually leading to Caroline's question, which is we're going to start moving into some of our fall gardening topics. And so potatoes would be included in that in the next few clinics. So even if you can't make one of our clinics, we do have recordings, but you should come live because we're really cool and it's fun to hang out with us. If you've been attending these sessions, I hope you have, because like I said, it's been pretty cool. We have been talking about keeping a garden journal and how that might help you, just keep track of what's working this year, what doesn't work, what, goes crazy. We were talking about beans that flowered but didn't produce fruit. Take those sorts of notes so that you can try things. And, we talked about having a pollinator garden near your vegetable garden. You can make notes like, wow, this year it was so much better, that sort of thing. So we really encourage the practice of garden journaling. You can keep a notebook, you can keep notes in your phone, whatever works, just to kind of track your progress through the year. We have been hosting these virtual plant clinics, I've referenced this a couple times, throughout the 2022 growing season. They've been on alternate Tuesday nights. They're all available on our YouTube site. And then on alternate Wednesdays, we kind of try to have weekly programming. We cover landscape gardening topics at our Zone 7 gardening. So for more information, you can go to fairfaxgardening.org. This is the site that has all of our clinic schedules and things like that, linked to our YouTube site. Go there if you're looking for references, handy articles, that sort of thing. And as I referenced earlier, we do have a YouTube site and all of these clinics have been recorded. So you can catch the bug of the week feature. You can reference earlier clinics. We've really kind of sketched out this year to be a comprehensive planning guide from start to finish for your garden season. And so, we're hoping that these are valuable references throughout this year and coming years. And finally, I just want to thank all of you for attending. It's so cool to have such great representation here. And we really appreciate all of you making the time to stop by tonight for your questions. And, we all are here to serve the county and provide information. So we look forward to seeing you at future clinics. Thank you so much.